It was a normal afternoon in the city, the kind where people were busy with their own lives. The air was filled with mixed sounds: footsteps, distant traffic, soft chatter, and the occasional laugh. In the center of a wide public space stood an old piano. Its surface showed signs of age, with small scratches and faded color, but the keys were still clean. A small sign nearby invited anyone to sit and play. Some people passed by without looking. Others stopped for a second, pressed a few keys, smiled, and moved on. Not far from the piano, a young girl stood quietly. She was not very tall and looked younger than her actual age. Her clothes were simple and worn, the kind that did not draw attention. Her hair was tied back loosely, and she carried a small bag on her shoulder. She had been standing there for a while, watching others play. Her eyes followed every movement of the hands on the keys. She wasn't smiling, but she didn't look sad either. She looked focused, as if the piano meant something important to her. People walked past her without noticing. A few glanced at her and then looked away. In a place filled with noise and motion, she seemed almost invisible. She took a small step forward and then stopped. Her fingers moved slightly, as if she was playing notes in the air. She took a deep breath and slowly walked toward the piano. As she reached it, a few people nearby noticed her. Some were already standing around, waiting to see who would play next. When they saw the girl, a few exchanged looks. One person quietly laughed. Another whispered something to a friend. Their faces showed doubt, even amusement. To them, she didn't look like someone who belonged at that piano. The girl placed her bag gently on the ground and stood in front of the piano. For a moment, she just looked at it. Her reflection was faintly visible on the surface. The keys waited silently. She raised her hand, then lowered it again. The laughter nearby grew a little louder, not cruel but careless. People assumed this would be a short and awkward moment. She finally sat down on the bench. It was slightly too high for her, and she adjusted herself carefully. Her feet barely touched the ground. Someone behind her chuckled. Another person pulled out a phone, ready to record what they thought might be a funny clip. No one expected anything serious. The girl rested her hands on her lap. Her shoulders rose and fell as she breathed in slowly. Her eyes closed for a second. In that moment, the world around her seemed to fade. The noise, the whispers, the judgment, all of it softened in her mind. All she could feel was the familiar weight of the moment she had waited for. She lifted her hands and hovered them above the keys. They trembled slightly, not from fear but from emotion. This piano was not like the one she practiced on at home. This one was louder, more exposed, surrounded by strangers. Still, it was a piano, and that was enough. The laughter continued. A man nearby shook his head, smiling as if he already knew how this would end. A group of teenagers stood close, curious but doubtful. The girl heard it all. She felt the eyes on her. For a brief second, she wondered if she should stand up and walk away. It would be easier. No one would stop her. But then she remembered the nights she practiced when everyone else was asleep. She remembered the times her fingers hurt, the times she failed and tried again. She remembered how music made her feel understood when words could not. Slowly, her back straightened. Her fingers lowered and touched the keys for the first time. The sound was soft and unsure, just a single note. It echoed lightly in the open space. A few people laughed louder. Someone said something jokingly. The girl paused. Her fingers rested on the keys, feeling their cool surface. She did not look back. She did not speak. Instead, she adjusted her hands, finding the right position. Her face showed calm now, a quiet focus. The noise around her blurred again. She pressed another key, then another, slowly forming a gentle pattern. Some people were still laughing, but fewer now. The sound coming from the piano was not random. It was careful. The girl played softly, as if testing the piano, learning its voice. Her movements were small but confident. The music was not loud enough to silence the crowd yet, but it was enough to make a few people look closer. A woman standing nearby lowered her phone slightly. She tilted her head, listening. A man who had been smiling stopped smiling. The girl continued, her fingers moving more freely now. Her shoulders relaxed. The piano responded to her touch, each note clearer than the last. The space around the piano slowly changed. Conversations faded into the background. The laughter softened, replaced by curiosity. People stepped closer without realizing it. The girl was no longer invisible. She was still at the beginning. The real moment had not arrived yet, but something was already happening. In those first quiet seconds, a shift began. What started as doubt was slowly turning into attention. and as her hands prepared to move faster, the girl leaned slightly forward, ready to let the music speak for her. The girl sat at the piano, her fingers lightly resting on the keys. The first note she played had already caught a few people off guard. They had laughed at her moments ago, expecting her to fumble or make a mistake, but now a few brows were raised, and whispers started to circulate. Some stepped closer, curious. She felt the eyes of the crowd on her, a mixture of doubt, amusement, and intrigue. The weight of judgment was heavy, but she let it settle around her without being distracted. She closed her eyes for a second and breathed deeply. Her hands were small compared to the keys, but she moved them with precision, finding comfort in the rhythm she had learned through countless hours of practice. The first soft notes turned into a short melody, delicate and careful, almost shy. The sound was gentle but filled with emotion, as if she was telling a story without words. People began to notice the difference between the hesitant touch of someone inexperienced and the deliberate, careful movement of someone who knew her instrument well. A few people nearby nudged each other, pointing quietly. "She actually knows what she's doing," someone whispered. The girl didn't react. Her focus was entirely on the piano. She started to press the keys with a little more confidence, letting her emotions flow naturally through her fingers. She could feel the resonance of the piano beneath her hands. Every note connected with the next, creating a soft, unfolding story. A man leaning against a nearby wall chuckled quietly at first, thinking it was still a small, amusing performance. But as the notes continued, the laughter died in his throat. He straightened, listening more closely. The melody was not complex yet, but there was a depth to it, an understanding of how to make each note count. It was simple but intentional, and it started to pull the attention of more people around. The girl did not look at the crowd. She did not need to. She only needed to feel the music beneath her fingers. Each note became slightly bolder, and her movements gained a rhythm that hinted at something larger building inside her. The laughter that had started before had mostly faded. A few whispers remained, now tinged with curiosity instead of ridicule. People were starting to wonder what she would do next. A woman standing nearby had lowered her bag and crossed her arms, her eyes fixed on the girl. She was impressed, even surprised. The melody was soft but expressive, delicate yet deliberate. It was not just random notes. It was a story unfolding with every touch. The girl's hands moved carefully, but there was an energy building behind each gesture. Even the skeptics in the crowd were now silent, leaning slightly forward, unable to look away. A group of teenagers at the back had initially been laughing, making jokes about the little girl and her tiny piano performance. But one of them, the tallest, whispered something that caught the attention of the others. They stopped giggling and started watching. The change was subtle, but it was happening. Her music was demanding attention, not by volume, but by the emotional pull it carried. The girl's hands moved faster now, but never sloppy. Each note connected naturally, leading to the next. Her focus was so complete that the world around her seemed to vanish. She could feel the crowd's presence, but she did not allow it to distract her. The music was her shield and her voice. It was her way of communicating when words might fail, her way of telling everyone that she belonged here, even if they had laughed at her moments ago. One elderly man in the corner leaned on his cane and watched quietly. He had seen many street performances, but something about the girl's presence made him pause. The melody was soft, but it carried honesty and courage. It was the kind of music that made people remember moments in their lives, memories they thought were lost, feelings they thought were hidden. The man smiled slightly, nodding as if acknowledging the girl's talent silently. The girl was beginning to explore a small variation in the melody, moving from soft, tentative notes to ones that had a little more depth. She could feel the emotion in her fingertips. There was a story in her mind, a story of struggle, of hope, and of quiet determination. She did not need to explain it. The piano could tell it for her, and she trusted that the audience, even the ones who had mocked her, could feel it too. The crowd around her had grown slightly larger. People who were just passing by had stopped to see what was happening. Some were leaning on benches, others had stopped walking entirely. They could feel that something was different. It was not just a child playing an instrument. It was someone speaking directly to their hearts through music. A young boy standing near the edge of the crowd watched with wide eyes. He was amazed. He had never seen anyone play the piano like that before. He had assumed that only trained adults could play well. But this girl, with her small frame and simple clothes, was changing that assumption with every note. The boy whispered to his mother, "She's really good," and she nodded quietly, also captivated. The girl was now fully immersed. Her fingers glided over the keys effortlessly, finding the right notes without hesitation. Each note was intentional. She was no longer concerned with the crowd, no longer aware of the previous laughter. Her mind was on the music and the story she wanted to tell. The melody began to shift slightly, gaining a hint of complexity. The rhythm changed, moving smoothly between soft, flowing passages and gentle, confident chords. Some people in the crowd had their arms crossed, trying to maintain a neutral expression, but their eyes betrayed their interest. They had come to judge, to see a mistake or a clumsy attempt, but now they were watching, waiting, captivated by the growing beauty of the music. It was subtle, but it was powerful. Every note carried a little more of the girl's determination, her courage, and her heart. The girl's confidence was building. She could feel it in her shoulders and her fingers. The piano was no longer intimidating. It was a friend, a companion that understood her in a way words could not. She let herself explore the instrument, adding small flourishes to the melody, gentle and natural, never forced. It was a careful balance between technical skill and emotional expression, and she was beginning to master it in this moment. People were starting to whisper again, but this time it was different. Words like amazing, incredible, and talented floated through the crowd. The laughter had disappeared entirely. Even those who had been most skeptical were now leaning in, trying to catch every note. Phones that had been raised to capture a joke were now lowered in awe, recording the performance as something remarkable instead. The girl was aware of the growing attention, but she did not let it change her playing. Her eyes remained softly closed, her mind focused entirely on the music. Every chord, every note, was a message, a reflection of her feelings. She was telling a story of persistence, of courage in the face of judgment, and of the quiet strength that comes from believing in oneself. The music began to swell gently, reaching a level where it could no longer be ignored. The melody was still soft, still delicate, but it carried power. The girl's fingers moved faster now, dancing lightly over the keys, creating patterns that were simple yet beautiful. The crowd could feel the energy, even if they could not yet understand the full skill behind it. A young woman in the front of the crowd wiped a tear from her eye. She did not know why she was emotional, only that the music had touched something inside her. The girl's performance was more than notes. It was connection. It reached people in a way that went beyond judgment, beyond appearances, and beyond expectation. The girl, once laughed at, had begun to change the entire atmosphere around her with every second she played out as she continued. The rhythm remained gentle but precise. There was a balance, a harmony that only comes from someone who truly loves what they are doing. The girl's presence, once underestimated, now radiated strength. She was no longer a subject of ridicule. She was a performer commanding attention without a single word. By now, the crowd was completely absorbed. Every sound of the city seemed to fade around them. Only the music existed, and only the girl at the piano. The first judgments, the first laughter, seemed like a distant memory. People who had doubted her could not believe their eyes and ears. The change was undeniable. She had turned a moment of mockery into a moment of wonder, and it was still only the beginning. The girl's fingers moved more confidently now. The melody had grown richer, and the music filled the space around the piano. People who had come expecting a small performance or a moment of awkwardness were now completely still, captivated by what they were hearing. The soft, careful notes had evolved into a flowing sequence that felt alive, as if the piano itself were speaking through her. Each chord, each touch of the keys, carried emotion, telling a story the crowd could feel but not yet fully understand. A man who had been leaning against a wall with a dismissive smirk now stood straighter. His eyes widened slightly, and he moved a step closer. The group of teenagers at the back, who had been joking moments ago, had gone quiet. One of them whispered to another, and both nodded, disbelief in their eyes. The girl's presence was commanding attention, but she remained unaware, her focus entirely on the music. The girl's hands moved faster, yet her movements were fluid, almost effortless. The music shifted subtly, introducing small variations that added depth and expression. It was no longer just a melody. It was a conversation, a message. Every person listening felt it in a personal way. A woman holding a small child clutched the child to her chest, letting the music sink in. A few older men nodded in appreciation, tapping their feet lightly, but respectfully. The girl's performance was bridging generations without a single word. A small smile touched the girl's lips as she played. She had reached the point where the music was no longer just notes. It was freedom. The crowd, sensing the change, leaned closer without realizing. The piano was no longer an ordinary instrument. It had become a stage for her courage and skill. Each note resonated with confidence, breaking through the initial judgment and laughter that had greeted her. The girl had transformed the energy around her into something powerful and pure. The melody began to build, slowly gaining a sense of urgency, a story moving forward. Her fingers danced across the keys, each movement precise but full of feeling. The crowd was now completely silent, mesmerized by the way a young girl, so underestimated, could command attention with such artistry. Even those who had been skeptical moments ago were now witnesses to something extraordinary. The music seemed to pull their emotions, creating a shared experience that no one could ignore. A young boy in the front row, eyes wide, held his breath as the melody swelled. He had never imagined anyone could play like this, and yet here she was, creating magic from nothing but the piano keys and her determination. His mother held him close, and he whispered, "I want to play like that someday." She nodded silently, feeling the power of the moment herself. The girl's music had touched them deeply, inspiring feelings that words could never express. The girl continued, her hands moving faster now, yet perfectly controlled. The piano responded to her touch as if it were an extension of her own body. The notes flowed seamlessly, creating harmony that filled every corner of the space. People were leaning in, some holding their phones quietly, capturing not a joke but a masterpiece unfolding in real time. Every person in the crowd felt a connection, even if only for a moment, to the story she was telling. Through her fingers, her eyes remained closed, her focus entirely internal. She was aware of the audience, but not distracted by them. The music was her world, and everyone else had been invited into it. Each chord carried emotion, vulnerability, hope, and strength intertwined. It was a performance that transcended expectations, a reminder that true talent cannot be judged by appearance or first impressions. The girl, once laughed at, had begun to rewrite the narrative around her with every note. An elderly woman in the crowd whispered to a friend, her voice trembling slightly, "She's remarkable. Can you feel it?" Her friend nodded, equally moved. The music had created a bridge between strangers, a shared experience of awe and inspiration. The laughter that had surrounded the girl before had vanished entirely, replaced with admiration, amazement, and respect. It was a moment of pure connection between performer and audience. The melody shifted again, this time softer, more introspective. The girl was telling a story now, not just showing skill. She let her fingers linger on certain keys, drawing out the emotion. People could feel the depth, the passion, and the quiet determination behind each note. The music spoke of trials, of moments of doubt, of perseverance, and of ultimate triumph. Everyone listening felt it in their own way, interpreting the story through their own experiences. A man in a business suit, who had been passing by on his phone earlier, had stopped completely. He had been skeptical and hurried, expecting a minor performance at best. Now he stood silently, eyes fixed on the piano, unable to look away. The music had drawn him in, and he could not move until it had finished. The girl's performance was creating a collective sense of wonder, a rare moment that made even strangers feel connected. Her fingers danced over the keys with a combination of strength and delicacy. The music was alive, shifting with the subtle movements of her hands. The crowd had become part of the performance without realizing it. Every person was holding their breath, leaning closer to hear and feel the music. A few small smiles appeared, some heads nodded lightly, and some eyes glistened with emotion. The girl's performance was changing the way they viewed not only the music, but the courage it took. To play so openly in front of strangers, the tempo increased slightly, and the melody became more complex. Her fingers flew over the keys with a grace and precision that seemed impossible for someone so young and so small. Each chord resonated fully, filling the space with a warmth that enveloped everyone. The music created a wave of emotion, and the audience was caught in its current. Every person could sense the journey the girl was taking them on, from soft beginnings to confident, expressive growth. The crowd had grown larger without anyone noticing. People passing by stopped, drawn in by the music. The energy shifted entirely. What had started as curiosity and amusement had become admiration and awe. The girl, who had been underestimated, was now the center of attention, commanding it not with words or gestures, but with her music. The piano had become a bridge between her and everyone who listened, and it was impossible to ignore the power of that connection. As she continued, the girl's movements became more fluid, more instinctive. The music carried a sense of narrative, a story that moved forward with emotion and intent. Her hands never faltered, never hesitated. She played with a confidence that seemed to grow with every note. The audience could feel her determination, her passion, and her heart through the music. It was as if she had taken all the doubt and laughter and turned it into energy. That fueled her performance. The girl's eyes opened briefly, scanning the crowd just enough to see their reactions. Faces that had been skeptical or amused were now full of awe and respect. The transformation in the audience was complete. No one doubted her ability now. They were witnessing something extraordinary. She smiled faintly and returned her focus to the keys, letting the music flow naturally from her hands, guiding the crowd through the story she was telling. The melody softened for a moment, delicate and reflective. The girl's fingers lingered on certain keys, emphasizing emotion and depth. People leaned in, caught in the beauty of the performance. Even those who had walked by with no intention of stopping were now part of the audience, held by the power of her music. It was a moment of pure magic, a moment that would remain in their memories long after the last note faded. Then, gradually, the melody built again, rising with quiet strength. The girl played with both precision and heart, creating a crescendo that felt like an emotional release. The crowd was silent, hanging on each note, feeling the culmination of skill, courage, and emotion. The girl, who had once been laughed at, had transformed the moment into something unforgettable, something that left everyone in awe and deeply moved. The piano had become more than an instrument, it had become a voice, and through it, the girl spoke to every heart in the crowd. The girl's fingers moved over the keys with confidence and grace. The music she played had become more expressive, reaching into the hearts of everyone around. The melody was no longer simple or tentative. It carried strength, feeling, and an undeniable sense of story. Each chord she struck was filled with emotion, and the dynamics of the music created a sense of tension and release that held the crowd completely still. People watched in awe, unable to believe the transformation they had just witnessed. Those who had laughed at her only moments ago now looked on in astonishment. Even the teenagers at the back, who had whispered jokes to each other, were completely captivated. Their faces showed admiration, some leaning forward, others holding their phones still, not wanting to break the magic of the moment. The girl's small frame seemed to expand with confidence as the music poured from her fingers. A woman near the front leaned on the railing, her eyes glistening with emotion. She could feel every note as if it were speaking directly to her heart. She wasn't the only one. The people around her were experiencing something personal, something they could not put into words. The girl's music had touched them in a way that transcended age, culture, and expectation. The piano was no longer an object. It was a vessel of expression, and she was guiding them through every emotion with each touch. The melody began to swell, growing more complex without losing its clarity. Her fingers danced over the keys, striking chords with precision and grace. Each note connected to the next seamlessly, creating a continuous wave of emotion. The crowd could feel the intensity building. They leaned in as if holding their breath, drawn into the story she was telling without uttering a single word. The girl's performance had become a journey, one that everyone in the space was traveling with her. The girl's expression showed focus and serenity. She was completely immersed in the music, unaware of the growing size of the crowd or their reactions. She was aware of the audience, but it did not distract her. Every movement of her hands was intentional, every note chosen to carry emotion and meaning. The music flowed naturally from her heart, and the crowd could feel the authenticity in every sound. Laughter and judgment had vanished entirely. Only admiration remained. A man standing near the edge of the crowd crossed his arms, his jaw tight, unable to look away. He had been skeptical at first, expecting an ordinary performance, perhaps even a humorous moment. Now, he was captivated, his mind fully engaged in the story unfolding before him. Each note seemed to speak directly to him, creating a connection that was impossible to ignore. The girl's skill and passion had transformed the space, creating a shared experience that everyone felt. The music took on a quieter, more introspective tone. The girl lingered on certain notes, letting the sound resonate and fill the air. The melody carried both fragility and strength, a delicate balance that required mastery and sensitivity. The crowd was completely silent, listening with a reverence that seemed almost sacred. Even strangers who had never met before felt a sense of unity, sharing the same emotion, the same awe. In that fleeting moment, her fingers moved with increasing speed and accuracy, adding layers of complexity without ever losing control. The melody now told a story of resilience, courage, and hope. Each chord was deliberate, conveying determination and emotion. The audience felt the journey in their own way, some thinking of challenges they had faced, others recalling moments of triumph or loss. The girl's performance had become more than music. It had become a reflection of life itself, and everyone listening felt touched by it. A young boy near the front of the crowd whispered to his mother, "I want to play like that." She smiled, holding him close, sharing the wonder he felt. The girl's performance was inspiring not only admiration but aspiration. She had shown that talent and determination could emerge from unexpected places, and that a single moment could captivate an entire crowd. It was a reminder that first impressions could never define someone's true potential. The crescendo of the music approached. Her hands moved faster, yet with clarity and precision. Each chord struck resonated through the space, commanding attention and creating anticipation. The audience felt the tension and release, their hearts moving with the ebb and flow of the melody. Every person in the crowd was aware that they were witnessing something rare, something extraordinary. The girl's talent had completely transformed the perception of everyone around her. The music shifted to a triumphant, soaring tone. The girl's fingers moved with skill and confidence, creating a melody that was both powerful and uplifting. The crowd was spellbound, unable to look away, caught in the emotion of the performance. Some people had tears in their eyes, moved by the beauty and depth of the music. Others smiled, feeling joy and inspiration wash over them. The laughter and doubt of moments before had been replaced entirely with respect and awe. As the melody reached its peak, the girl's movements became more fluid, more expressive. Every note she played told a story, every chord carried emotion. The audience could feel the intensity of her focus, the passion behind each gesture. The music seemed to fill the space with light, transforming the environment into a place of connection and wonder. Every person present felt the power of her performance, and it was impossible not to be moved. The girl's music gradually softened, transitioning to a gentle, reflective passage. Her fingers moved delicately, almost tenderly, over the keys. The contrast between the intense, triumphant sections and this intimate section was breathtaking. It allowed the audience to breathe, to absorb the journey they had experienced, and to reflect on the emotions stirred within them. The music was both personal and universal, touching every listener in a unique and profound way. The crowd was completely silent, waiting, listening, fully engaged in the moment. Even strangers who had not intended to stop were now captivated, drawn in by the emotional depth and technical mastery of the performance. The girl had taken what began as a moment of doubt and mockery and turned it into an experience that none of them would ever forget. The silence was not awkward or tense. It was full of reverence and admiration for the talent they were witnessing. Her final notes were soft, lingering in the air, allowing the last sounds to resonate fully. The girl lifted her hands slowly, as if acknowledging the journey she had just shared. The piano echoed for a brief moment before falling completely silent. The audience sat or stood in stunned silence, the impact of the performance settling around them like a weightless, invisible presence. What had started with laughter and doubt had ended in awe and inspiration. Then, slowly, the crowd began to react. Applause erupted, growing louder and louder. People clapped, cheered, and some even whistled, overwhelmed by what they had just experienced. Strangers smiled at each other, sharing the joy and wonder of the moment. The girl, still seated, allowed herself a small, quiet smile. She did not speak or bow. Her expression conveyed gratitude and quiet pride. She had communicated her story through the music alone, and it had been heard and felt by everyone. The performance had changed more than just the atmosphere around the piano. It had changed the perception of those who had doubted her, who had laughed at her. They now saw her for what she truly was, talented, courageous, and capable of creating something remarkable. The music had broken down barriers, erased judgment, and left a lasting impression on every listener. The girl had not only played the piano, she had touched hearts and inspired minds, leaving everyone in the crowd with a memory that would not fade. The girl slowly rose from the piano bench, her small hands brushing lightly over the keys one last time. She did not speak, she did not wave, she simply stood there, a quiet presence in the midst of the still echo of her music. The crowd around her had grown silent again, caught between the lingering notes and their own emotions. It was a moment of reflection, a pause in time where the impact of what they had just witnessed began to settle fully in their hearts. People looked at her with awe and respect. The earlier laughter and judgment had completely vanished. Faces that had shown doubt now glimmered with amazement. Some people whispered to each other, sharing their disbelief and admiration. "She was incredible," one person murmured. "I can't believe it," said another. The crowd seemed to understand, even without words. that they had witnessed something extraordinary, a rare display of talent and courage. The girl adjusted the strap of her bag over her shoulder and took a small step back from the piano. Her posture was relaxed but proud. She had not played to impress anyone. She had played because the music was a part of her. Yet, in doing so, she had inspired and moved everyone around her. The lesson she offered was clear. Appearances could be deceiving, and talent often lies hidden beneath quiet determination and perseverance. A young boy in the crowd pointed to the piano, his eyes shining. "Mom, she's amazing. I want to learn like her." His mother smiled and held him close, sharing the sense of wonder that had enveloped the crowd. The girl's performance had sparked hope and inspiration, not just admiration. She had shown that with dedication and courage, anyone could create beauty, even when underestimated or overlooked. People slowly began to approach the piano, leaving small notes of appreciation behind or pressing a key themselves. Feeling the echoes of her music, the crowd remained engaged, talking quietly among themselves, sharing their interpretations of the performance, and expressing gratitude for the unexpected experience. The girl walked away calmly, her face serene, unaffected by the attention, carrying with her the quiet pride of someone who had expressed themselves fully and honestly. The space around the piano felt transformed. It was no longer just a public place. It had become a place of connection, inspiration, and emotional resonance. People who had come expecting to judge or pass time found themselves part of a shared experience, one that reminded them of the power of art and the courage it takes to show it to the world. The girl's music had bridged gaps, broken barriers, and touched hearts in ways that words could never achieve. An elderly woman in the crowd took a deep breath, tears glistening in her eyes. "She reminded me why I love music," she said softly. Her friend nodded, equally moved. They had come with ordinary expectations, but they were leaving with something far more profound, a sense of wonder, and a reminder of the extraordinary possibilities that exist in everyday life. The girl's presence, quiet and unassuming, had created a ripple effect that touched everyone who had witnessed her performance. The laughter that had greeted her at the beginning seemed like a distant memory. People who had doubted her now carried a sense of humility and respect. They had learned a lesson without a single word being spoken. Never underestimate someone based on appearance, and never doubt the power of determination and skill. The girl's courage to play despite the initial ridicule had transformed a simple act into a lesson in resilience, confidence, and the universal language of music. A man standing near the back, who had initially been skeptical, shook his head in amazement. "I misjudged her completely," he admitted quietly to a friend. The friend nodded, still caught up in the emotional impact of the performance. They, like many others, had learned something essential that day. True talent cannot be measured by appearances, and a brave heart can create moments that inspire and change lives. The girl continued walking away slowly, her steps calm, almost meditative. She did not look back, but the energy of her performance lingered in the air, wrapping around the crowd like an invisible thread connecting them all. Every person carried a piece of that moment with them, a memory that would resurface when they needed inspiration or a reminder of the unexpected wonders life can bring. The piano, once a simple instrument in a public space, now felt alive with the echoes of her music. Those who stayed to play afterward did so with reverence, aware that they had witnessed something exceptional. Others shared their experiences with friends and strangers alike, recounting the story of the girl who had amazed everyone with nothing but her talent and courage. The story began to grow, carried by those who had been present, spreading the impact of that one extraordinary moment. The girl's journey had been quiet and unassuming. She had faced judgment, ridicule, and doubt, yet she remained focused and true to herself. Her performance had not only showcased her skill, but had reminded everyone around her of the power of perseverance, courage, and the beauty of expressing oneself fully. The music had become her voice, speaking louder than any words, touching hearts and inspiring minds. As the crowd slowly dispersed, the sense of awe remained. Conversations were softer now, filled with reflection and admiration. People remembered the way the girl's hands had moved across the keys, the emotions carried in every note, and the calm confidence she displayed despite the initial laughter. They carried with them a renewed appreciation for talent, courage, and the extraordinary potential within ordinary people. The girl disappeared into the crowd, leaving behind only the piano and the memory of her performance. Yet the lesson she offered lingered long after she had gone. She had shown that true skill and determination cannot be underestimated, that courage can transform fear and ridicule into admiration, and that one person, through their passion and talent, can touch the hearts of many. In that moment, the city felt a little warmer, a little more connected. Strangers who had never spoken to each other were united by the shared experience of witnessing something beautiful and unexpected. The girls' music had become more than a performance. It had become a reminder that in every corner of the world, in every overlooked person, there lies potential to inspire, to amaze, and to leave a lasting impact. The girl walked away with quiet confidence, her heart light and satisfied. She had faced doubt, she had faced laughter, and she had risen above it all. Through her music, she had reminded everyone present of a simple but powerful truth: talent, courage, and authenticity can break through judgment, touch hearts, and leave a legacy that words alone cannot describe. And in that quiet, human moment, everyone who had witnessed her performance carried a piece of that magic with them, forever changed by the music of a girl who refused to be underestimated.